Dave Talks Comics, Episode 53, Alpha Flight 5 through 8. Dave Talks Comics is a podcast on the subjects of comic books and cartoons. I talk about comics I have read and cartoons I have watched. Dave Talks Comics can be found on the web at davetalkscomics.com or at facebook.com/davetalkscomics. I talk from my notes on these comics. I don't go panel by panel. I try to do more than just summarize the stories. This is not a spoiler-free podcast. I try not to spoil everything, but in the process of talking about these comics and cartoons, I'm probably going to spoil them in some way. On this episode, I will be talking about issues 5, 6, 7, and 8 of Alpha Flight. Alpha Flight 5 through 8. This is the Alpha Flight series that John Byrne wrote and drew. These issues came out December of 83 through March of 84. On a previous episode of Dave Talks Comics, I talked about issues 1 through 4. I wasn't crazy about them, but I'm reading them because I remember them. I have good memories of them, and I guess they're just, I don't know, maybe it wasn't that I wasn't crazy about it as much as it was that it just didn't seem like there was a whole lot to talk about. And I think there's more to talk about with these issues, or at least 3 of them. The first issue focuses on, and all of these issues kind of focus on, well, not specifically on individual members, but the first issue kind of focuses on one member. The second issue focuses on another member of the team. And then the last 2 issues focus on a duo. So let me get into these. Okay, so the first issue focuses on Puck. And it's extremely apparent if you look at the covers who the focus is for each of these issues. And so Puck is, if you remember from issue 2, Puck gets eviscerated or, torn open, gutted practically by Marina, or is it Marina? I'm not sure. She goes kind of nutso, and that led into that whole story with the Master, which I thought was a little kind of weird, but okay. So this story picks up, because Puck was out of the picture until this issue. And in this issue, Puck begins with Puck in the hospital. Shaman, Dr. Michael Two Youngmen, he's a doctor as well as a superhero, and so he's checking up on Puck. But that doesn't last very long. The rest of the issue is kind of about Puck tracking down. He realizes there's something going on in the hospital, or he finds something going on in the hospital when he's in pain, and he calls for a nurse, and the nurse doesn't show up, and so he goes to look, and he starts seeing some shady stuff going on, and he realizes there's something going on with the medication, with the pain medicine that's being delivered to the hospital, and that the nurse, it looks like she's a junkie, and so he whips out his costume, which I guess he keeps, in his bedside, even though he's supposed to be in disguise. He's not supposed to reveal to anybody that he's a superhero. And he tracks down these guys and manages to alert the police to where they're at, because at one point he passes out, and and it turns out that there's a doctor in the hospital who's kind of behind all this, and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, there's a few plot holes in this. It's not great. I mean, the artwork I really like, and I like the story. I remember this from when I was much younger, and so there's a certain amount of nostalgia factor in there. As far as the story goes, I mean, one thing that I thought, well, a couple of things I thought worked. One's kind of amusing, which is the Puck is kind of a short, hairy guy, and the Puck logo on the cover is very hairy. And I thought that was kind of funny because the cover shows him bounding all over the place. And then the other thing was, in the scene where he passes out, they do something which is that you see that basically at a moment from his perspective, he's reaching to try to grab the telephone to alert. He's already knocked out the bad guys, but he's about to pass out because he's still his wounds haven't healed completely, and he's taken on these guys, and I guess his suit is kind of holding him together. But he's passing out. He's reaching for the telephone, and the art gets really, really rough, really crude, really. And that's not something you see from John Byrne very often. And so I thought that was kind of an interesting choice to make. And yeah, I really like that. Now the other part of this issue is you get in previous issues we've been getting the continuing origins of Alpha Flight, and I think in one of the letter columns, John Byrne said this would run through issue 12. So in this issue, you get the first of two parts of Shaman's origin. That's Dr. Michael II Youngman. And in this issue, it's kind of him. He's a doctor. His wife is sick. He kind of rejects the old ways. His grandfather wants him to teach him about these, the magic and the traditions and those sorts of things, and he doesn't want to have anything to do with them. And he rejects all this. And at the same time, his wife is dying of cancer, I think. And then his daughter plays a role in this, and I believe she joins Alpha Flight later on, Elizabeth, although I don't remember what her name is. But so this was kind of, so that's kind of interesting. Now the next issue, the focus is on Snowbird, and it also is Assistant Editors Month. So if you aren't familiar with Assistant Editors Month, it was a feature that ran for a few years back in the early 80s, where for a month they would let the assistant editors run things. And the idea was usually that they would do silly stuff with the issue. And, I mean, there's some issues I think of, like Captain America and X-Men, which I both had subscriptions to back in the early 80s, where they really did some silly stuff, although nothing exactly comes to mind, but they really were blatant about it in some ways. So in this, on the splash page at the beginning of the issue, there's a big stamp there that says, "Beware, it's Assistant Editors Month. Don't tell us. Don't say we didn't know. Don't say we didn't warn you." So this issue focuses on Snowbird, and she's in her civilian identity, she's a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police? I'm not. Yes, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP. In the District of Mackenzie in the Northwest Territories. And so she has to fight this. She's getting a lot of slack from her, or flack, not slack, but flack from her boss, who's new. Her old boss didn't have a problem with her taking time off to do whatever, but, be a member of Alpha Flight, really. But her new boss doesn't like the fact she's disappearing. At first he locks her up, then she gets some sense that there's something going on. There's a creature out there on the loose. There's a great disturbance in the force. And so she breaks out of this cell because, of course, she can transform into different kinds of animals, although I don't think they show exactly what she transforms into. They just show her kind of jumping out of panel, and the next thing you see is there's a big hole in the wall. So I'm not sure, because it's usually like a polar bear or an owl, or there must be some other animals that she transforms into. So I guess the assistant editor's month, so she finds this creature who's causing this disturbance, and the assistant editor's month gag in this issue is that she creates a snowstorm. Either she does or he does. No, actually I think he does, this creature. I'm not sure if it's really a he. But this creature is called Kolomak, Kolomaq. And I guess this is another one of these creatures that comes from the Norse or Northern Canadian mythologies or mythologies of the Native Americans of Canada. So anyway, it creates kind of a snowstorm, so then the next several pages are all white, except for you get thought bubbles and word balloons, but it goes on for more than a couple pages. And then eventually Snowbird defeats this creature and everything, and then the snowstorm ends, and you finally can see what's going on again. And it's an okay story. I mean, this is probably the weakest of the three stories, since 7 and 8 is really just one story. And then the second part of this issue is the continuation of Shaman's story, and here he accepts the old ways, and he becomes a great sorcerer, and you even get a one-page cameo appearance by Dr. Strange and the Ancient One, who apparently have become aware of the shaman. And that's it basically for issue 6. Now, issue 7 and 8 are a two-part story that focus on North Star and Aurora, the twins, who both have powers of flight and speed and can create a great light, a great burst of light when they touch, if they touch hands, if they so desire, I guess. I don't think it's something that automatically happens. So Aurora has this split personality, and the two sides of her don't get along. And so the story opens with, oh yes, I should mention something else. About this story is the title of this issue is The Importance of Being Deadly, which struck me as a very Stan Lee sort of you know what? Actually, you know what? That's not the one. Actually, it was issue 5 that had the Stan Lee title to it. I'm sorry. It was What Fools These Mortals Be, which definitely sounds very vintage Stan Lee. But this one kind of also has a bit of a Stan Lee title, that The Importance of Being Deadly. And so I guess I got my wires crossed a little there. Anyhow, this is a very important issue in a number of ways. So you get a little bit of an Aurora, a little bit of Jean-Marie, who is Aurora's other personality, her civilian identity, who is a school teacher and very repressed, and always has her hair tied up in a bun and wears glasses. And then Aurora is very carefree and likes to show off her body, and so it's very different. So the issue opens with them, her and her brother, at a psychiatrist's office, and then they go out to lunch. There's some discussion between North Star and the psychiatrist, but then the brother and sister go out to lunch, and they get attacked by she gets attacked by a mugger who steals her handbag. And she goes after him, and then she snaps and reverts to her Aurora personality. Aurora personality. And and then they meet an old friend of North Star's by the name of Raymond Belmont. And I read this issue years ago. And there's something that I can see now, and I think I'd heard people talk about years since, but I didn't pick up on it all at the time. I mean, this was 1983, so I was 1983, early 84, so I was 13 years old, 14 years old. But this is kind of the beginning of... Basically, Raymond Belmont is supposed to be a former lover of North Star, who is, of course, gay. And this is kind of the first time that they've really been revealed this fact. Although they do it, kind of they do it in a way that obviously wasn't apparent to me at that age. And I'm sure there was plenty of people who were reading it then who did not pick up on it. At least, people my age and younger, and possibly older too, who didn't pick up on this. I mean, they do it subtly. I guess that's the best way to put it. They do it subtly. They talk about how North Star was, at a point in his life where he didn't know how to deal with things, and there was something about him that was different, and it would be very easily to interpret that to mean just the mutant, the fact that he's a mutant, but there's more to it than that. Anyway, so his friend has a restaurant. They are in Quebec, I think it is. Montreal. They're in Montreal. Not Quebec. When I said Quebec, I meant Quebec City, of course. But they are in Montreal, and Raymond owns a restaurant in Montreal, but it's in a part of town that this guy by the name of Ernest St. Ives, who's like kind of the local not gang leader, but mafioso or heavy. He's kind of a big shot who is trying to get a hold of everything for real estate purposes, and among the people who won't sell to him is North Star's friend Raymond. And so Ernest shows, it turns out that the guy who snatched Aurora's purse was somebody who works for St. Ives, Ernest St. Ives. And I guess the whole idea is if he makes the neighborhood bad enough, then he'll drive this restaurant out of business because nobody will want to come there to eat. So eventually, in this issue, St. Ives shows up and he kills Raymond, and that leads to this bit here where if it wasn't clear before that North Star, had a special relationship with Raymond, they show him over the body and he's saying things, talking about, let's see, let me read this. Until North Star found Aurora, Raymond Belmont had been the most important person in his life. More than a father, much more than a friend, he had found Jean-Paul scarcely more than a boy, alone and frightened of what he thought he was and what he feared he might become. And Raymond had led him out of that dark fear into the bright, clear light of self-acceptance, teaching him not to fear his mutant powers or any other thing. Now with the speaking of 4 short, sharp words, an iron door has closed upon a chapter of his life, and Jean-Paul Bobier is alone again. And that's basically how this issue ends. Well, okay, and the other thing that I should mention is that Aurora gets snatched by St. Ives, who mistakes her for Raymond's daughter. And I guess Raymond was married or had a family at one point. I don't know. But, and so that's where that issue ends. But then you also get an interlude afterwards, which is where you see, let's see, what do you see? Oh yeah, this is a little cryptic. It's obviously leading up to something that is going to be revealed later on. But there's somebody named, what is his name? Where does it show it? It doesn't show. Against one man. Yeah, this guy who's playing chess against all these different people. And apparently he is a member of Alec Thorne, who was a member of Gamma Flight. And the Gamma Flight, there was these, Alpha Flight is just one of these teams. Apparently there's a couple others. I think there was an Omega Flight also, and Gamma Flight and Beta Flight, because Puck and Marina were originally members of Beta Flight, I believe, and they were promoted to Alpha Flight at the time this book began, I guess because they needed more team members, and so that word came down. Anyway, he's playing all these people. Let's see, this is in Winnipeg, Manitoba, and this guy, Alec Thorne, is playing all these people. His code name is Smart Alec, and this is only 2 pages long, this interlude, and he meets this woman named, or she approaches him, named Delphine Courtney. And I remember this name, and I think I remember what the story is behind her, or part of it. But I'm not sure exactly when this is all going to come to fruition, or when this part of the story is going to come to the forefront, if it's going to be within these first 12 issues or further out than that. But, so it's kind of cryptic. It's just kind of introducing them, kind of the way John Byrne likes to do in some of these stories, like he did when I was talking about Namor the Submariner, his run on that, where he would show you little bits of what was coming up, like that Invader story arc. You get little bits about the Human Torch, or about these Nazis and that kind of stuff. Anyway, so the back half of this issue focuses on the origin of Snowbird. And you really don't get much about Snowbird in this as much as you do about her mother and father. And her mother was Nelvana, who is a goddess. I am Nelvana, mortal goddess of the northern lights. And she wants to have a child, and so she seduces this scientist by the name of Dr. Easton, Richard Easton. And he has discovered this artifact, which is this circlet, that goes on the head. I guess kind of a crown, not really a crown though. But when he puts it on, he sees these Nelvana and this other god. And Nelvana at first appears as an old woman, so she changes her form to look like a young woman, and she seduces him. And then when he wakes up, years have passed, he's much older, and he goes running off into the wild. Now, I believe this is what leads into that Tundra story from the first issue of Alpha Flight, that being that they have to face there. But Nelvana gives birth to a child who becomes, of course, Snowbird. But she is how does he describe it? A transmorph, able to assume any shape at will. And so he has to act quickly to bind it to this reality. Otherwise, it may never possess a human form. So he raises this child, I guess, who becomes Snowbird. And, okay, so that's the end of issue 7. Now, issue 8, which is the last one I've read at this time, is the second part of this story. So you get some recap in this of what happened in the previous issue, because this is the early 1980s after all. And so Northstar is going after his sister, and he somehow, he finds St. Ives' address in the phone book, and he goes after St. Ives. Now, he shows up, and he sees his sister hanging out with St. Ives, just kind of chatting it up, and then he gets knocked out by one of St. Ives' thugs. And then they introduce this kind of weird character named Nemesis, and I think this is, I really don't recall any other appearances by her in Alpha Flight. I'm not sure if she comes back. I haven't done any research to see if she does. But she is kind of a crusader, and she wants to take down St. Ives, although it's not really clear why, other than the fact that he's a bad guy. And what her motivations are, or who she really is. But she wears this costume that's all black and red, and she wields this sword that's only an atom thick, and she takes apart St. Ives pretty neatly. And Northstar seems to think that that under the mask is Raymond's daughter, Danielle, but it's not Danielle. But they don't show you the face. You only see her, once her mask is taken off, you only see her from the side or from the behind. Or her head is turned, and she's got red hair, kind of like Danielle does, but it's longer than Danielle's hair. So it was kind of a weird, almost like a Deus Ex Machina, where they introduced this element to kind of solve everything, because St. Ives, I guess I didn't explain this before, and I should have, St. Ives killed Raymond, but the way he killed him was with this deadly touch. And apparently he acquired this deadly touch back during World War I, so roughly 60, 70, 65 years before this story takes place. And apparently whatever it was that gave him this ability to kill people by touching them, like I said, this happened during World War I. He was a soldier, a French soldier, or was he a Canadian soldier? Anyway, during World War I, and he everybody around him had died, and somehow the effects of the chemical warfare, and he saw death coming for him, and then all of a sudden he was okay, but then he finds that his touching people kills them, and it's not like he sucks their energy out or anything, or that's not clear. Yeah, that's not clear, but maybe that is why he's lived so long and why he looks so young at this point. But they don't explicitly state that, but maybe we're just supposed to assume that. That's a reasonable assumption, I guess. So you get St. Ives' origin in this, and you get a few pages of that, and that's kind of neat. 2 pages? I guess 2 pages of that. And I guess the only other thing worth mentioning in this part of the story is that then there's a breakup between, well, it turns out they figure out who tipped off that Danielle, that is Raymond's daughter, was behind all this, and it's Aurora who figures this out, and then there's a split between Aurora and Northstar, where he thinks that she was sleeping with St. Ives, and that's about it, for this story. And then you get a little more of the origins of Alpha Flight, and I guess that's about it for these 4 issues. Yeah, that's about it for these 4 issues. I mean, the artwork is good. I wish I had cleaner copies of these. The visual storytelling is very good. I like some of the effects that John Byrne uses, and it's much better than what he would do later on, I think, with Namor. Although even here he is doing this stuff where he sometimes does not include backgrounds, and so you'll just get the characters interacting, and the background is blank, although sometimes it'll be colored one color or another, and I'm not a big fan of that, but sometimes he includes the backgrounds. But I don't know. But this is, so far I'm really enjoying this Alpha Flight read, and this really picks up, and it's really much better than I think the first 4 issues were, and it encourages me to want to continue to read on and continue to see how these stories play out. I think the next issue focuses on Sasquatch, and can't remember. There's got to be an issue that focuses on Shaman, because Shaman hasn't gotten a solo issue yet. Just about everybody else has, I think. Maybe not. But, so that's it for Alpha Flight issues 5 through 8. That's it for episode 53 of Dave Talks Comics. Feedback can be left at davetalkscomics.com or facebook.com/davetalkscomics. Or, if you've made it this far, why don't you tweet Northstar to @DaveTalksComics. Next time on Dave Talks Comics, I'll be talking about the Who's Who, the definitive directory of the DC Universe, and the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. I will be wrapping up my coverage of the first issue of both of those series. I'm Dave. Thanks for listening.